Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. Hey, right off the bat, I just want to give an apology. I already, put out an apology there on Twitter yesterday, but I know that there were some audio issues in the last episode. Unfortunately, when we were recording the episode, we didn't really notice most of the time that it was happening because we could both hear each other clearly and everything seemed fine. But obviously from listening to the episode, as many of you did, there are chunks of it that are just kind of non-intelligible because of the feedback and the echo. So really do apologize for that. Obviously no excuse. I know that, I try to be thorough when I'm listening to the audio, but I kind of just skipped through and assumed that the audio was of good quality and was releasable, etc. So do apologize for that. I have kind of reworked my system of what tools I'm using for recording and editing to avoid these issues in the future. Shout out to Ridiculous Hat, who's definitely given me some pointers and some tips for making sure that we have quality audio going forward. So I appreciate your patience. I appreciate you sticking with us. I appreciate you jumping back in for another episode. We've got a great episode for you today. So let's jump into today's episode. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Can't Stop Snapping, the official podcast of MarvelSnapZone.com. Well, today we're going to be covering a couple of things with the new season pass, some of the rewards and some of the changes that have come with this pass, as well as we're going to be talking all things random and RNG in the game, and the new card Nick Fury kind of sets us up for that. I'm joined by a new guest host, first-time guest host, Drewberry. Drewberry has been creating some Marvel Snap content over on his YouTube, and we are glad to have him. Hey, Drewberry, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so it feels like a real honor to be guest hosting.
Yeah, no, you and me have been chatting a little while now about making this happen, and I think we've come up with some interesting topics to cover today. So appreciate all your preparation.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
Yeah, before we dive in, I'd love to just give you a chance to just kind of tell the listeners a little bit about your background with gaming, card games, etc., how you kind of got into Marvel Snap and why you decided to start making content about it.
Yeah, sure thing. So it's probably like 90% of your guests. I have a Hearthstone background. That's a game I kind of been playing for at least like the last 5 years, I would say, or even more. I started that one in beta as well. And I really loved it. It was nice that you had a fairly quick game on your phone that you could play. I love card games, strategy, that sort of thing. But I've never really made content, so this is my first time giving that a shot. I kind of wanted to do it with Hearthstone, but I passed. Now here we are with Snap. And the minute I saw Snap, I just knew that I was going to fall in love with this game, from the team that's developing it to the game mechanics to the art. It just all took me right away. And haven't looked back. So I'm having a lot of fun with Snap. And yeah, I just make all kinds of crazy challenge videos on my YouTube. So be sure if you want to check it out. I'm just having fun with it, really. I'm definitely not the best player, that's for sure. Just fun.
Yeah, well, I feel you there. Sometimes people ask me when I have guests on, they're like, well, what rank are you? I think they assume that I make it to infinite each season, and that's not the case. So, awesome. Well, let's dive right in here. So let's talk season pass. So this is the Sword and Shield season. So it kind of has a a Shield kind of Agents of Shield vibe going on. So first things first, the new card that you do unlock. We talked a little bit about this on the last episode, but in the introduction. But this is Nick Fury. He is a 5-cost, 7-power card. His ability reads, on reveal, add 3 random 6-cost cards to your hand. Now, normally you'd expect us to have a bunch of conversation about him, which we will, but I want to save that until we've kind of covered a couple of other things. So one thing I know we wanted to talk about is that one change in the past couple seasons, you've been able to unlock 2 new card backs that you can put on your decks, and those have been part of the season pass rewards. This time around, they are part of the rank season rewards, meaning you have to get to certain ranks to unlock them. So at level rank 50 platinum, you can get a shield card back, and at rank 100 or infinite, you can get a Hydra card back. And Drewberry, I wanted to hear, what are your thoughts on this change? Do you think a good change, bad change?
Yeah, actually, I appreciate this change. So they added extra random variants for the free and the premium, so that's kind of to compensate for the lack of the card backs. But what I actually appreciate about them doing this change is that they're experimenting. And that's what closed beta is supposed to be for, them to experiment different methods of monetization, kind of like the Nexus events, or different ranked rewards, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. And when it's only lasting about a month, I think that's a decent sample size for the developers to understand what they should do moving forward, but also for the community to either rage about it, right, or be really happy about it and share their experiences on like the official Discord or just online and all that good stuff. So I'm totally all for them trying small things like this and just gathering as much feedback as possible.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I mean, I agree that I don't. It doesn't. What am I trying to say? It doesn't hit me that strong. I'm not like super upset or super like excited about the idea, if that makes sense. I'm neutral about this specific change, but overall, I think you're looking at a higher level, right? The fact that they're willing to try new things and kind of see what feels best and what fits best, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and honestly, I prefer, variants to card backs. So like if I can get more of those, um, in the season pass rewards or just other things, I probably want those other things more. Even if it's credits, then I want the card backs. Maybe that's not always true, depending on the card backs, what's available, what options you can unlock, but not terribly torn. But we'll see how people feel about it, right? Because not everybody makes it to infinite. I think their data has shown that, I want to say, I can't remember the exact numbers, right? So I'm spitballing, but it's like 5 to 10% of players or less have like reached infinite each season. So
Right.
that makes it a little more, like, hey, if you see somebody with that card back, it's like, oh, that they made it to infinite, right? And that's kind of in the case with the avatars, but yeah. So we'll see if this change sticks.
Yeah.
Another thing, there is a new variant of Agent 13 and a new variant of Iron Man. How you feeling about the new variants?
Yeah, pretty cool. I really like the Iron Man one, but I don't know about you, but don't you find a few of the Iron Man variants kind of blend together or kind of look a little bit similar art style? I'm all for it. I think they all look fantastic, but this one just kind of looked a little bit similar to the others. And then the Agent 13, I like that one a lot as well. And even the Nick Fury one, I think is going to look fantastic. But what I really want to see is when it's animated and that rain is pouring over top of him. I think it's going to look so good.
Yeah, no, I love the Nick Fury one. That's probably my favorite out of the three. The Iron Man one, to be honest, there hasn't been a Iron Man variant yet that I'm like, that's the one I want to get, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the existing ones and this one. I mean, not to say they're bad, right? I'm not saying they're ugly or I don't like them. It's just none of them are one of those ones that was like, I have to have that, right? So yeah, I'm kind of middle ground there, but I still think it's a fun reward to be able to get kind of some unique variants that kind of meet the theme with the season. Yeah, so that's kind of the high level of the season pass. Other than that, not too many crazy changes. We still have the season caches, level 51, the season rewards and on. I don't think anything has changed with those. Obviously, they have the same drop rates for the rewards you can get out of there, right?
Yeah, yeah. One thing I wanted to quickly mention, just to bring a little bit of awareness to it, if you're ever listening here and you're thinking about buying the premium pass, maybe the new card doesn't excite you too much, so you're thinking maybe this month you'll pass on it, but maybe the credits or the amount of gold seems tempting to pick up the premium pass. You don't actually get that much credits if you buy the premium pass compared to the free version. So they advertise it as you get, I believe, 2,500 credits if you get the premium pass, but you're actually going to get 2,100 credits just from the free, just getting the free rewards along the way as you play the game. So you don't get that big of a difference in credits, but what you do get is a lot of cosmetics, like the variants that Michael and I were talking about, as well as, of course, I think the biggest value factor here is the new card. Because if you don't get the new card now, you'll have to wait another 8 weeks for it to join Pool 3, and then only then will you have the chance to pull that card, right? So it might be a really long time if you don't pick up Nick Fury now until you get to play with him. So I just want to kind of bring awareness to that. I think everyone knows, what you can get from one to the other, but I think credits-wise, one of the most valuable resources. They don't really say specifically how much you get. They just put a bunch of different, 100 here, 100 there, and don't add it up for you. So just wanted to make that clear.
No, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, that's all things considered, it's very normal for like a free-to-play game, right? Obviously, it's marketing, right? It's like try to make it sound as positive as possible, right? That you're getting the most value.
Right.
Now, obviously, I feel like there is value for me personally in the season pass. Not everybody does. But yeah, it's like they're not being dishonest per se, but it's obviously trying to kind of make it sound like a sweeter deal than if you don't pay for it, right? Trying to incentivize
Yes,
you more.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
be aware of marketing tactics near you. Well, awesome. Yeah. So let's dive from there back to Nick Fury. I think Nick Fury is an interesting card. I'm interested to hear your take. So again, he's a 5 cost. So all nothing changing or no cards played to enable him in any other way. Nick can be played on turn 5. And then on turn 5, you would get 3 random 6-cost cards in your hand. And obviously, again, we're saying you haven't played Magic, you haven't done anything else. You'd be able to play one of those, right, on turn 6. So yeah, I guess what are your general thoughts? Before I say my thoughts, what are your general thoughts about Nick Fury as far as a good card? Does he stand up to the impact cards like Wave has had in a previous season pass, or kind of a disappointment? What's your thought?
I don't think Nick Fury holds a candle to Wave, to be honest, or even Daredevil I would put up there as well as like a really valuable card to get in the past or get early on. I think he might. He's. I don't even think he's as good as Thor. Like, I want to like the card, but I have a hard time getting around the random factor here. And also, even if we took his effect away and we just look at his stats, a 5/7, that's not the best. One of the cards I think about when I look at Nick Fury, probably because of the stat line, but is Black Bolt. So Black Bolt being a 5/7. But his on reveal actually disrupts your opponent's hand in the sense that he's going to discard a card right before the most important turn of the game, which is turn 6. Yet Black Bolt never sees play, right? Whereas Nick Fury actually is doing nothing to your opponent. He's going to be 7 power on the board, which is not weak, but it's not powerful. And he's going to give you 3 random cards. And, a lot of my community members, they were telling me different strategies. Like, you can collector, you can put the cards in your hand, you can have a big hand for your Devil Dino, all these cool things. And that's 100% accurate. But it's actually kind of tough to pull off because you can only have 7 cards in your hand. And if you, let's say, can only have space for 1 or 2 of the Nick Fury's cards to go to your hand, like that's a significant less value from his effect, and then you're only playing a 5 for 7 while your opponent might play like Iron Man and win a location. So I'm kind of struggling with Nick Fury to be really excited about him, but I still like playing him. And then he's got really cool art, so I'll always be a sucker for that, and I'll give it a shot,
Yeah, no, and I am definitely all for giving each card a shot, and I think each card has a place, right? I think there's no card that has 0 value, for sure. But I just think, yeah, I feel like he comes a little late in the game. Again, I feel like you have to enable him. You need to be playing him with Wave, or you need to be playing him with Magic, or you need to be playing him with Psylocke, right? Something that enables you to play him earlier, or be able to like play him, but then be able to play an extra card of his that you pull. You know what I mean? I just feel like he's not great by himself. I feel like he needs other cards around him to combo better.
Yes.
And not to say, I mean, there are great cards that need, to be great, need a combo, but I just feel like he's weaker than other cards that need additional cards to combo. You know what I mean? So So yeah, so interesting for sure. Another piece of this, and I think this will lead into kind of our next conversation, is that um, the fact that you get random 6 cost cards. Now there are some great 6 cost cards I'm sure you'd love to get in your hand randomly that aren't in your deck. Because you can only have so many cards in a deck. But like, what if you pull Hella and you're not playing a discard deck, right?
Hmm.
Like, that's just a waste. Now, yes, maybe it gives your collector one. That Hella counts as 1 power for your collector, or it's +2 for your Devil Dino. But I don't know. It's just, to me, it's not that great. It feels like there's better things you could be doing on turn 5, right? Um,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
the curve is kind of nice because that's the most attractive thing about Nick Fury here for me is that you play him on 5, you guaranteed a 6 drop, but just like you said, like what if that's Hela or what if that's Arnim Zola, right? Like then you have a 0 power 6 drop in your hand. I was trying things like with Dracula, trying to dump my hand as quickly as possible, play Nick Fury on 5, only have 6 drops in my hand on 6, and then Dracula hopefully will get a really good buff from there. But even then, the consistency just wasn't quite there because of the high variance in the power levels of 6 costs. Just because they're 6 costs doesn't mean they're going to have high power totals.
well, yeah,
So
I
it can get
mean,
really risky.
you got 6 costs with 4 power, 5 power, 6 power, 0 power, Um,
Yep.
and at that point, it's not even worth it. You really played the Dracula, right? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's kind of towards the, if we're going thumbs up, thumb sideways, or thumbs down, it's kind of towards the thumb sideways, going towards down for me right now with Nick Fury. I think, um, depending on other 6 cost cards that maybe get added to the pool, or if he's tweaked in the future, could be better. Um,
Yep.
but for right now, for me, he falls kind of lower on the scale. But one thing that you and me had chatted before that we'd like to spend the bulk of this conversation about is just what is the current state of RNG and randomness in Marvel Snap. What are the highs and lows, positive, negatives? Um, are there things that need to be changed? Is it fun? I mean, there's just a lot of things, right? And there's lots of things that randomness, right? Just basics of a card game, the fact that your cards are shuffled, right? That's random, but also card abilities, locations, etc. So, we wanted to talk through that. So, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off on this conversation. Just kind of take us over the high level of randomness and RNG in Marvel Snap and kind of your general thoughts to start. Hey all, if you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is completely free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Sure. Yeah. So randomness is going to always forever be in any digital card game an issue, I think. But it's also going to create some of the most fun moments you'll have gaming in a card game. In Marvel Snap particular, I've kind of narrowed it down to what I think is 3 layers of randomness in Snap. So first of all, just like any card game, right? This is always going to exist. There is the RNG of what you draw. So you could have a combo that has like 2 or 3 cards. Like you could have that Mystique Onslaught, Iron Man combo, whatever it is, but you might not draw it. Now, in Marvel Snap, I find this much more forgiving because you have 12 cards in your deck. You're drawing, I think, 3 or 4 in the beginning, and then you draw 5. So you only end up with, like, let's say 3 cards without any additional draw left in your deck. So you've drawn most of your deck, and you have a good chance of this RNG not being a huge factor. Now, there's also things like drawing on curve, these sorts of things which are going to give you a benefit over your opponent when you're playing, which is technically random benefit. The second is the locations. So inherently, the locations, just as a mechanic, are random. We don't know what they're going to be unless you have the Watcher in your hand. And even then,
Not
there's
great.
still 3, right? And there's still 3 randomly generated locations out of, I believe, a pool of possibly 70 locations, and one's going to be added every single week in Marvel Snap's lifespan. So that's going to accumulate to very high variance, and it's not really something you can build your decks around for. Like they do have the featured locations, which have 40% increases of showing, but you can only bank on that for so long. There's going to be a lot of days where there's just going to be locations that are just totally random, but it's still fun, right? Because it's in turn 1, 2, and 3. You still feel like you have a chance. Your opponent doesn't know either, so it's mutual RNG. So it's usually okay. And then we have the third one, which is the locations and the cards, their actual effects, which are providing random effects. Just a really obvious one is like Agent 13. He's a 1/2, adds a random card to your hand. Now, that card could eventually lead to a game-winning play, right? Or even more famously, I think everyone can understand this one is when you're playing and then X-Mansion comes up and the two cards that go out is one guy gets Infinite and one guy gets Misty Knight or something like that, right?
Yep. Yep.
And it's just like, oh, I guess I'll retreat. So those are the kind of, in my mind, the three layers of randomness that kind of build up into Marvel Snap. But my overall feeling, I'll get into this a little bit more maybe in a bit. I want to hear your thoughts on these layers of randomness, but I actually think Marvel Snap did a really good job with digital card game RNG, the way it's handled, the way it feels, because the games are so quick that if it is bad, you just get out, jump into another one. That feels good to me. And then the upsides of a really crazy random effect are so much fun that it kind of makes it, I don't know, I think it's okay. I'm not too bothered by it. But I'd like to hear what you think, Michael.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think they've got a great balance, and sometimes it's hard to put into words exactly like how or why maybe you or me feel that way. But I'll try to say a couple of things. I feel like out of the hundreds of games I've played, there's maybe been 5 or less where I felt like the RNG was so bad between locations, card effects, location effects, how I drew, right, where it was just like I'm upset, like I feel frustrated, I want to rage quit, right? So out of maybe let's say I've played 1,000 matches, maybe 5 or less of those I've felt that way, right? I feel like those are pretty good percentage, right? Where it doesn't feel like things are unfair. Again, it's hard to sometimes that's like anecdotal. It's just like I'm not like keeping track of every game and every variance of every game, but that's my overall feeling. And then I'll also say with locations being random, right? I mean, sometimes the locations are not ideal, right? I mean, we've all played a game where you have Sanctum Sanctorum, you can't play cards there. Then the next one flips over and it's like a bar with no name. Person with the lowest score here wins the location. So then you're like, okay, I'm not playing there either, right? And then the next one will be like sewers or something, or something that like minuses your power of your cards there, right? And you're like, wow, this all stinks, right? But honestly, you can look at it that way, but sometimes those are the most fun games because if the person sticks in, at least for me, right? This is my opinion. But if my opponent sticks in the game when we have stuff like that, it's kind of like what is going to happen, right? Like I don't know what their deck is, they don't know what my deck is, and sometimes it's like it's a wild finish, right? Because you're just playing weird and you're not playing your normal strategy, right? Maybe you don't play the first 3 turns because you don't know what to do, and then you're kind of ad hoc trying to throw something together for a win in the last couple turns. And sometimes that's really fun and memorable, right? And so I feel like more often than not for me, the randomness ends up feeling more fun or memorable than it does frustrating and discouraging, right? So I feel like it's at a high level. I think the randomness is not too much. I feel like it's in an okay spot currently.
Yeah, I love the point that you brought up. Like sometimes when everything goes wrong, it becomes a different strategy game. You have to figure out how to get yourself out of this crazy situation that the game has thrown you into. And all of a sudden you're playing a game that you haven't played, even if you played 1,000 games of Marvel Snap, now you're playing a completely new game. And maybe not even with your own cards, right? Depending on what happened. So I love that just getting thrown in. And I think just like you said, like those are the games that people are going to take screenshots of and share, or content creators are going to upload them because they're just hilarious, or you can kind of bond over these really wild and fun moments in Marvel Snap. So there is beauty to the madness, so to speak, like in the crazy random world. And it's really cool how digital card games can do this because beforehand, like I used to play like Magic, like not before it was digital, like just like with the cards, right? The Gathering, and we'd collect cards, but you could never have a completely random effect that pulls a random card that you don't exist if you didn't own it, if you didn't physically own it. Um, and in this world, you can. And even better so for people maybe who end up new players down the line, they get to play with random cards that they don't own in their collection yet and experience those for the first time through some random event. And they go tell their buddy, "Oh my gosh, this just happened. I just saw Thanos. It was crazy."
Yeah.
Like something like that.
No, yeah, and I think they were smart to put in a couple cards. Obviously, they haven't released Galactus, Thanos, etc., but they've allowed
Hmm.
them to be randomly generated, right? And so, yeah, definitely fun. I think one thing that lends itself nicely to Marvel Snap, with where the RNG is at, is that the games aren't long, right? The games
Yes.
are much shorter than most card games, and so even if things go off the rails, it doesn't feel frustrating because you know you're only in this game for like 3 minutes, right? At least for me. Again, this is all my opinion. Listeners out there, you may say this guy's crazy. I get so frustrated, but for me, like even if things go off the rails and I end up retreating on turn four, it's like okay, I only spent 2 minutes of my time on that, and I can do another one, and it's gonna be different. It's gonna be a whole new game, right? Like you said. If this was a game that each match took 10 or 15 minutes and it had the same characteristics of randomness, I could see that being more frustrating, right? So I think, well, yeah, one of the reasons that maybe some of the RNG feels okay is where it's at is just by the nature of the deck size, the turn, how many turns there are in a game and how long a game lasts. I think that plays into its favor.
Absolutely. I think you just wrote the obituary for Hearthstone as Marvel Snap steps over it because that's exactly why I stopped playing that game and only play Marvel Snap is quick game times that are really fun experiences. And if I have a bad one, I can move on to the next. Is
Yeah.
exactly it.
Yep.
Yeah, and then on the topic of random, if you don't mind, I was thinking, what cards actually have random in Marvel Snap? Like, there's some crazy effects, but when you really look into it, like, what actually has random? So I quickly filtered them, and there's 14 cards that specifically have the word, anyways, random in their card text. And I'm curious. I hope you have it in front of you. Is there any that stand out to you that are overly frustrating, or maybe like a bit of a problem child, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I do have the list here in front of me, and there's a couple of things.
Yeah.
I Iceman is one on here, right? Funny thing
Mm-hmm.
about Iceman, at least my thought here is that I like to play the deck I'm playing the most right now is a Hella discard deck, and by nature of that, I there's lots of times where I have like 3 or 4 6 cost cards in my hand. Um, so for better or for worse, sometimes I only have 6 cost cards in my hand, and so then it goes to increase one of my cards by one, and it can't. It says no target. So then my opponent knows I only have 6 cost cards in my hand or higher, uh, but also they don't increase the costs, so that's a good thing. On
Mm.
the inverse, what's happened to me a lot with Iceman with that kind of a deck is that I will have 2 or 3 6 cost cards in my hand, and I will have one not 6 cost card in my hand. So that one is guaranteed to be the one that increases. And often that's the card I'm trying to play my next turn, and then I can't play it, right? So it really messes with my ramp. So Iron Man or Iceman can definitely be disruptive. Right? That's one example of playing against the kind of deck that I'm playing a lot of. But I think Iceman's interesting, right? I think he's one of the most consistent because no matter what, I mean, your opponent has cards in their hand and in their deck that they want to play, right? Obviously, they built the deck to play the cards in it. So, like,
Hmm.
increasing generally any of them by 1 cost is going to throw off what they're going to be able to do on some turn in the game, right?
Yep, absolutely. Iceman, he's funny, eh? Because you wouldn't have thought that that's totally a random effect, or you don't even you don't even notice the randomness of it really when you play the card. You're just like, you know what? If it hits a card, then I'm happy. And I guess like to your point, if it doesn't hit a card, then I've received information on my opponent's hand, and that's just as good.
Yep.
Then there's so some of these like aren't too bad, and I didn't even really consider the fact that they're random. There's cards like that are just kind of adding onto your own cards. So like Hulkbuster, he actually technically has a random effect because you have three cards at a location, let's say, and you play Hulkbuster, it's going to be one out of three. So even though it's a random effect, it's pretty controlled odds. And then usually people only play Hulkbuster when they have one card there to guarantee the hit.
Correct.
That's not so bad.
Yeah.
Wolverine going to a random location, maybe that's a bit random. Sometimes it can be frustrating randomly, but then also maybe he jumps to Sanctum Sanctorum and wins you the game, right? And then really quickly, there's like Dr. Octopus, who's kind of hard to control. He's going to pull four cards randomly from your opponent's hand and place them at a location. That can be either really good or really bad. But there's nothing here that makes me go, this is broken, this shouldn't be in the game, this causes a very negative experience for me. At least in the random cards. Maybe there's some cards that don't do random effects that might do that. But in these random cards, I don't know if you're familiar with Hearthstone, but just in case some viewers are, there's a card in Hearthstone that they printed. It's called the Box of Yogg-Saron, and it would just play 10 cards randomly or something. I don't even know if it was that. Maybe it was 20 cards, but it just played a lot of random cards and random effects would happen. And it was kind of frustrating because as the opponent, I felt like I couldn't do anything, and my opponent's doing this cool thing, and I'm just spectating. I don't really get that feeling when I look at any of this list, from Juggernaut, Arnim Zola, Hela. Like maybe Hela might be the biggest culprit because she has some crazy big turn sixes. But this kind of makes me feel good, or at least a little bit better about the randomness in Marvel Snap when I see this list.
Yeah, I think, part of it, I think all of them have, well, I shouldn't say all. I shouldn't, use superlatives, but I think most of them have a higher reward, but also there's a risk, right? High risk, high reward. Whereas you're playing it, you potentially can get a high reward, right? Like Gambit can kill their Sunspot that's been buffing up for several turns, or Morph played on turn 3 or 4 or 5 potentially could be a high cost card they're saving in their hand for the end of the game, right? But also Gambit can destroy like a squirrel that generated from Central Park, right? Or Morph can turn into something that doesn't help you, right? So all of these, I think that's a good balance, right? Dr. Octopus, right? He's got a better stat line than Nick Fury. He's a 5'10", but you may pull some great cards on your opponent's side of the board. I mean, again, going back to my example, the deck I'm playing a lot of right now is Hela. So they play Dr. Octopus on turn 5. Generally, I've got my discard cards hidden behind Invisible Woman, so I still have a bunch of 6-cost cards in my hand. And he lays down like an Infinite, a Doctor Doom, and a Magneto for me, right? Or something like that. It's like, okay, great, I just won the game. So
Retreats.
Yeah, I think the card random effects right now are in a good balance because they're playing into that design of making sure there's risk and reward, right? It can be good for you as the player using them, but there's also that that risk that it's not going to be, which balances it out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I totally agree. The one thing I don't want to see printed, which I get a little bit nervous with the ability with digital card games in the future of design, is if they print a card that says something like add random card to your hand, discount it by X amount. That makes me nervous. Any kind of discount, even in Snap, we see cards like Sarah being almost nerf worthy, right? Because providing discounts to your hand is just always a good thing. It's just always going to set up crazy combos. And I find random card plus a discount, it's a bit too much. It's what keeps Agent 13 and Nick Fury in line, is that they're not getting discounted. You're just getting random cards. Mm-hmm. So it's not too bad. But when they get discounted, it's scary stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Well, yeah, I think maybe let's talk about locations next.
Yeah.
I know you kind of did something similar. You kind of put together a graphic here that has kind of the locations with random effects, right? How are you feeling about these ones, or do any of these stand out to you specifically? Hey all, I wanted to take a quick moment to talk to you about MarvelSnapZone.com. Marvel Snap Zone is a one-stop shop for everything Marvel Snap on the internet. They have new articles nearly every day that cover deck building, strategy, card breakdowns, etc. They have a great collection tracker tool and a deck list builder that works off of that collection tracker so that you can know what decks you can build with your current card collection. They have guides and deck lists for all level of players and all collection level of players. Make sure to go to MarvelSnapZone.com and check it out now.
Yeah, so the first thing I think about when locations, I think it's the biggest factor to an early retreat, or at least maybe rage-inducing for some players, because it's not the location that they want, or it had a very devastating random effect, and so they just get out of there. Now, the benefit is you can retreat and you don't lose as many cubes, so it doesn't feel too bad. But there's some culprits here that I think are possibly worth removing at a later time, or maybe reworking, or we just leave them in there and hopefully there's enough locations it doesn't pop out too frequently. So the one that I first think of is District X. Replace both decks with 10 random cards. Now, it can be kind of funny, but more often than not, I brought a deck to the table that I really wanted to play with, and now I can't. Just like I kind of wanted to play a certain combo, and now I guess I don't get to. So that's that. And then outside of that, they're honestly pretty tame. The ones with random. Is there any that stick out to you?
Well, one I'd love to talk about for just a second, just because I haven't talked about it on an episode yet, is the new location this week, which is the Triskelion.
Yes.
And the location effect reads, fill each player's hand with random cards. So maxing out your hand to 7 cards. So obviously, if this is the first location flipped, I think it flips before you draw a card, right? So you start with 3 cards in your hand, and so it would give you 4 random cards and not let you draw the first turn. And basically it's going to stop you from drawing, right? I think because the locations flip before you draw, unless I'm saying that wrong. I don't think I am, but I think the locations flip each turns 1, 2, and 3 before you draw. So I think that's interesting. Basically, it guarantees you to like get 1 less card out of your deck. Obviously, It also gives you the random cards, but I also think that, something we need to account for is that you're going to get 1 less card, so that's a slightly lower chance for you to pull off a combo, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know. I haven't played a ton the last day or two, just as this has been the featured and new location. But the couple times I've played with it, that's the thing that kind of stuck out to me is that I said stood out to me is that some of my decks are more dependent on making sure I draw as many cards as possible to pull off a combo. Feel less powerful with this location. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's when I first saw this location, I was honestly terrified. I was like, "Oh no, not like more random effects." I was a little bit worried, and after having played a few games, I don't find it so bad. I don't find it too bad. It's pretty crazy, but there's some really interesting combinations. And one thing I always love about these new locations is they bring light to some unused cards that now have a little bit more value because there's this location in the pool. So like a funny one is, I don't know if you have this card yet, but Ronan the Accuser. I struggled to find a place to use him, and he works really well in this sort of when this location pops up. He's like almost guaranteed to be at least 8 or 10 power, and then you can kind of combo him with Maximus, who's going to get your opponent to draw 2 more cards, or maybe they can't even draw the cards because their hand is full, so that guarantees you maximum value. I actually, even though it's random, and sometimes it's weird, the random cards that you'll get, there is a little bit of strategy behind it. I think that you can take advantage of in building your deck, at least for now, while it's a featured location.
For sure.
Gets a little harder when it's in the random pool, right?
Yeah. So definitely an interesting location. Couple other thoughts. I mean, things like Sokovia and Sakar, right? So Sokovia discarding a card from each player's hand, Sakar playing a card down at that location from each player's hand, right? It's the same, like, it's random for both players, but obviously depending on what it's your hand and what kind of a deck you're playing, it can be more advantageous for one player or another, right? Because again, I mean, it's happened many a time where I get a 6 cost card played down and my opponent gets a 1 cost card played down, or vice versa, right? Or Sokovia
Yeah.
discards my main card, right? Using the example of my Hela deck again, seems to always know that I have Hela in my hand and it always seems to discard Hela, right? And my opponent gets like Nightcrawler discard. It's like, okay, well, they just snapped, right? Because they saw what I had discarded and now they're feeling pretty good, right? Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, it's really kind of a coin flip sometimes with those ones.
Yes.
Because you each depends on how many cards you have on that turn, right? Your odds, because it could flip on that could be the location on turn 3, and maybe you haven't played any cards down, so you have more cards in your hand, so you have a better odds of not getting that one card in your hand discarded that you don't want to, etc. Or yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, so those ones are interesting, I think.
Yeah, or like kind of you're like hinting at with the Hella deck or something like, or maybe I brought a discard deck to the table and it discards APOC, and then my opponent's like, what? He
Yep.
didn't even lose a card. He got a benefit, and I just lost my Iron Man or something really cool that I wanted to do. And sometimes you can overcome those effects, and then it kind of builds a story almost, a little bit of a mini journey in your game that you had a very poor beginning, but overcame it and won the game. But the thing I worry about with these sorts of locations is that they usually force early retreats.
Mm-hmm.
The games don't get played out, and then you don't even get to see if it did work out, or if or the card that got played from your hand. Maybe that was really I was relying on that, but my opponent just retreated because they didn't like that they lost a card from their hand. Not necessarily that the one that I played was better, but they just don't like that their strategy was ruined. So
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. I was just gonna finish up with that. I just every time I play Marvel Snap, if I could, and if my opponent was happy enough, I would like to reach turn 6 in the final turn. Even if I lose cubes, I just like to play the games out most times.
You and me were on the same brainwave there, because I was going to say that now sometimes if my opponent does snap and I'm just like I'm close to that next rank threshold or something, right? I'm more likely to retreat if like it was my best card that was discarded, right? Or the card I really needed. But that being said, I mean, if they don't snap, and even if I lost my Hela, I'm still gonna play, right? Like 10 out of 10 times, if they don't snap and I don't have to consider that, I'm gonna stick through it, even if it may look like I'm out of it, right? Or if let's say if they've already snapped, and I've already decided to stay in the game, then Sakar flips and I get my best card discarded. Well, I'm already in it for 2 cubes, right? So I'm gonna stick into it till turn 6, because the cubes are only going to get worse if I finish out the game, right? So I am like you. I like to, as much as possible, I like to see games all the way through to the end, right? Within reason. So it's just more fun for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I'll even snap for them, even though I know a surefire loss is coming my way, and I'll salute them the whole way through and just say, good for you, friend. You had a sweet combo. Here's 8 cubes, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah. Out of all the ones that have random effects, I think the one that has the least negative or positive impact, I guess I would say, is Los Diablos space, right? At the end of turn 3, ruin random location. Now, obviously, sometimes it can be a little negative because maybe you're like, Asgard was here and I was putting some cards here to be buffed, but like that's it being destroyed, like that benefit goes away for your opponent as well, right? So I feel like it's a pretty neutral random effect, if you will. All the other ones can have a bigger effect, I think, to sway the game either way. But Los Diablos space, and I'm not saying that as a bad thing. Like when Los Diablos space shows up, I'm saying, you know what, great, I'm okay with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, if let's say Los Diablos was the first location that's revealed, then you at least know going in as the turns unfold that you have a 50% chance of one of those locations being ruined, and you can kind of compensate for that. You can just strategize around that and plan for it. One last thing about the locations really quick that I wanted to touch on is that I do believe the dev team has confirmed that they program show rates for certain locations. So there's locations like an obvious one is Ego. Ego is this crazy location. Talk about randomness. Literally takes over the game for you and your opponent. But there's a very, very low chance of seeing that location pop up. And I think that's a very healthy way for the developers to adjust maybe some of these frustrating locations, ones that they like, let's say District X again, like maybe like people are really raging about that one. Okay, we'll just make it a 5% chance of seeing that. So you still get that crazy random, oh my gosh, it's District X gameplay factor, but you're not going to get it every time and you don't have to worry about it so much. And I hope it's flexible enough on the back end that they can really manipulate those numbers to either create, this is maybe a bigger idea, but like a rotation, a location rotation, or at least reducing the bad ones and increasing the good ones every now and then.
Yeah, no, I would love to see something like, okay, once we cross the 50, or sorry, the 100 location landmark, right? Maybe they rotate through, so only 50 or only 75 are active for a month, right? And then the next month, another 25 get switched out, and the other 25 that were switched out get switched back in, right? And they kind of rotate through in a way like that. I mean, that it doesn't have to be exactly like that, but that idea of maybe, you know, the odds are maximum of 75 locations or something, right, in a given month. And I think that gives you, you know, reason to come back each month, because again, you know, we talk about every game being different, but if the locations are changing on a month by month basis or something, then the games next month are going to be completely different than the games this month, and the meta and the strategy, and I think that's very healthy for the longevity of the game.
Oh my gosh, endless value, endless fun, constant
Yep.
changing meta. Love it.
Well, awesome. You know, I think there was one other, you know, kind of infographic, if you will, that you put together that I'd love to talk about, which is kind of cards with controlled randomness, right? They have random effects, but you can have a little bit more control, or, you know, depending on when you play them, if you wait to play them, you're a little more guaranteed to get their effect or not, you know. So why don't you kick us off there?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing I want to say really quickly is that this was just a quick skim through the collection of ones that I think have some bit of randomness to them. If you guys know anyone listening who knows of some cards that maybe fall into this category of a little bit of random, definitely shout out Michael or myself. Love to hear it. But so we have like two. They kind of fell into two packages, and I guess it makes sense when I say it out loud here. But you have the discard package and the on reveal package, and they just inherently have a bit of randomness. The easiest ones to give an example for is you have Blade. Blade's a 1/3, and he's going to discard a card from your hand when he's played on reveal. But that card isn't specific. So the reason I don't have Lady Sif in here is because that's even more controlled. It's very specific. I know exactly which card is going to be discarded unless I have 2/6 costs, let's say. Whereas Blade, it's just going to be one of, let's say I have a hand of 5, it's going to be 1 in 5. That's my odds. And I just hope it's not Hela, but we all know she has an increased chance of getting discarded, right? So on the flip side, we have the on reveal package, and an easy example here is Ironheart. I have 5 cards on the board. Ironheart's going to randomly buff 3 times plus 2 power to 3 of those 5. And so there isn't I don't know exactly which ones. I do know that at least 3 out of 5 of my cards are going to get the buff, and that's good enough for me. I can plan around that. So that's where these cards kind of fall into play. Any that stand out to you, or any you want to chat about?
Well, yeah, I mean, briefly, I'll talk about discard package, right? Because obviously, I've already stated multiple times I've been playing a lot of discard lately, and yeah, I mean that is the strategy. I feel like within a Hella deck, right? Is how do you play the cards? What order do you play them in? Which ones do you choose to include in the deck? Do you hide them behind Invisible Woman? Do you not? And that depends on what's in your hand, right? There's so many things, right? Like if I have Hellcow in my hand and I have Hela in my hand and I don't have Invisible Woman to throw Hellcow behind, I get really nervous because I may have only 4 or 5 cards in my hand, and 2 of those cards are going to get discarded. So the odds of discarding Hela often feel a little too high, right? But like you said, if I have Lady Sif, for example, that's a little more controlled. Same thing with Ghost Rider, right? Like Ghost Rider, will resurrect or bring back a card that you've discarded. But if you've only discarded 1 card at that point when you've played Ghost Rider, obviously that's control over that randomness, right? So I mean, I think the discard it's my favorite archetype right now, because I think there are ways, it's interesting. We all have different experiences with Snap, but I've seen various creators just in the last week posting on Twitter just saying, like, I've tried the Hella discard package. It's not working. I can't ever get it off. But then I think about it. I get it off like, 75% of the time. So, I think it's just how you play and how you kind of work around that randomness on the discard side. So that's my side on the discard side. Going over to the on reveal, I think there's some interesting ones. Jubilee, I think, is very interesting with the change. I loved the Jubilee America Chavez combo
Yes.
before it got nerfed. And it was because it was unintentional, right? Jubilee would pull the top card of your deck, and because of the way America Chavez works, as you don't draw it till turn 6, if it does end up on the top of your deck, you just keep skipping over it. So by the time you play Jubilee, the odds were very high. I mean, you were probably pulling America Chavez with Jubilee 80% of the time, right? So then it turned into like a 4/11, right? A 4-cost 11 power, which was great. I mean, it was amazing. But now, I mean, there's a little bit less control, right? I mean, the later you play Jubilee, the less cards you have in your hand, or the less cards you have left in your deck, I should say. And so, like, you kind of know what's still in your deck, and maybe what your odds are for pulling a specific card, but still pretty RNG, right?
Yeah, for sure. Heavily so. I think by the time it's turn 4, if you play her on curve, you're looking at what, maybe 5 and 6. So it's a 1 in 5 or 6 of hopefully it's a good card. I actually don't play a whole lot of Jubilee myself for that very reason of just that risk of not getting the right, like it's a high cost for, that's a big turn, and then you might not get the power output that you needed. But she's got to be one of the highest variance cards for, again, I mentioned this earlier, but like early retreats or just outright winning the game, or my opponent just leaves because they didn't like what they saw. Like they got Iron Man and they're stoked, or they got Infinite and it's like the dream Jubilee, or they accidentally pulled another weak card that they're running like Mantis, or just something, right? So there is quite a bit of variance for her. It's like if you were really tracking your deck, maybe you could really take advantage of it. I know they don't have like a built-in deck tracker right now, but honestly, maybe if that was incorporated to the game, she'd have a higher win rate, or at least play rate.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really hope they bring in a destroy tracker, a discard tracker, to let you know what's left in your deck. I mean, that would be huge, right? One other one I'd love to talk about, I think is interesting, White Tiger. I've seen this discussed. People have asked the developers about this multiple times. I think most people know it now. But White Tiger plays the tiger to a random location, right?
Yeah.
What is it called? Is it just called Tiger? No, what is it called? It's
I think it's
Spirit.
a white spirit or something, or
Yeah,
tiger spirit.
everybody knows what I'm talking about, but now I'm like, I don't remember what the token is called. Anyway, everybody out there, you know what I'm talking about. So it plays it to to a random location. A lot of people were thinking, well, okay, if I have my location on my left, if it only has 1 open slot, and my one on my right has 3 open slots, it's like more likely to go to the one with 3, right? But because they're thinking it's rolling 25% for the if you have 4 open locations on the board, it's thinking 25% each, right? 70. But the way I think it works is it's just a coin flip, 50-50, right? As long as there's an open slot on one, it's a 50-50. So
Wow, yeah, I never thought of it that way.
yeah,
I had the same train of thought as you, 50-50.
yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
Well, yeah, and so people are thinking it's rolling like open slots, but it's rolling locations, right? It's rolling left or right.
Right.
So 50. So it's just interesting, right? So like people were thinking maybe they could strategize around it a little bit more, but the reality is you can't, right? So I think there's probably a couple other cards like that, but you just got to pay attention to the text, right? Because if it says location, it's not doing spots open per location. It is determining it per location. How many locations are options, right?
Yeah, that is a fascinating clarification that I didn't even consider until now, but it actually is totally validated. I could see why somebody would think that that's how it works. When you think of Marvel Snap in like almost a grid format of being a 4-4-4 grid rather than the 3 location positions that they have. Wow, I never thought of that, but that's very interesting. They could almost make cards that have a more particular on that grid aspect of things. Like if you have X amount of cards at a location, XYZ happens or something like that. I don't know. Thinking
Yeah.
out loud here, but very fascinating.
No, and there's certain cards that do affect like a card at a location. So it's like, um, it may, at least I think, right? Because I want to say Rogue steals a ongoing ability from one card at that location across the board from you, right?
Right.
So
Yes.
so that
Yep.
one is rolling like per location or per slots that are filled on that side of the
Right.
board, right? So I mean it's
Yep.
different, but it's kind of that feel, right? So
Wow,
um
I love that. I never thought of it that way, but that is a very good way to think about it.
yeah.
Interesting.
I guess last thing, I know we're coming up on time here, but like you've got Korg and Rockslide on here, right? I mean, we could talk a lot about rocks, but rocks obviously it's RNG because it depends on where it actually goes in their deck. But I mean, there's math, right? And it's not just for them, but like people have calculated the probability of when you put a rock in their deck and how many cards are left in their deck. What's the probability they draw it? Obviously, the earlier you put it in, the more chances they're going to have to draw it throughout the course of the game. Things like that, right? So some of these things are random, but also there's some math we can calculate and know kind of a harder probability than just completely random, right?
Exactly. That's exactly why I put them in here is because you just don't know when you're going to draw those rocks, and they're interesting cards, like Korg being an early play to maybe disrupt your opponent, but maybe that rock ends up on the bottom of their deck. Whereas Rock Slide, you get the two rocks on curve if you play them out four. They only have a couple cards in their deck. Higher probability that they do draw a rock and maybe disrupting their turn 5, 6, which really hurts them. So. But again, it's all maybes, right? So that's why I have a bit of randomness, and I had to put them down there.
Yeah. No. No. So I mean, overall, I've loved this conversation. Um, I think we're both on the same page. I think we've established that there are a lot of layers to the randomness in Marvel Snap, but I think we both feel that it's at a healthy level currently. So I guess just in conclusion, kind of wrapping it together, I mean, what kinds of things do you think Second Dinner could do that could throw it out of balance that you hope they avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of how like this topic, how we got to this topic kind of spawned is that they are printing new cards with random effects, and it's something that we have to be wary of in the future. And I'm definitely going to keep a close eye on like the data mine cards or just like whenever they're recently releasing new cards, if they do have random effects. I think the best thing that Team Second Dinner can do is to just kind of minimize the game impact of these random effects, make them more fun, maybe even meme, just some kind of text that doesn't completely win a game, doesn't become the most powerful card in the game. It's a really bad spot if your card game, the top three cards include the word random in their text effect, right? You
Yep.
don't want to be there. So I hope they don't get to that point. I have confidence that they won't. They don't have a lot of random at the moment, as we've broken down today. It's in pretty good state. So I have faith. But, that's why this conversation came apart. They just released a new card and a new location back to back with random effects. So it is something they're still printing and to be aware of.
Yep. Yep. And so I agree with you. I think the only thing, I mean, the thing they can do bad is do too much, right? And I think they understand by the nature of the short sessions of the game that they really have to balance randomness, right? Um, where there's what we've talked about. There's risk and reward, things that aren't too frustrating, and or if they are with certain locations, they show up less, right? So it still kind of keeps that fun randomness element, and it's not something that's consistently happening and detracting from the strategy and just the deck building of the game. So, well,
Yeah,
awesome.
for sure.
Hey, Drewberry, this has been a great conversation, and listeners, I really hope you've enjoyed it. This is something we haven't covered a ton. We've always talked about randomness just as it's come up throughout the existence of this podcast, but this is kind of the first time we've done a deep dive, and I think this has been a valuable conversation. Um, Drewberry, before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't give you just another chance to kind of give a shout out about your socials, about your content you're creating, and how the listeners can best find you and support you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much. It's honestly an honor to be on here. I've listened to every episode since the beginning of this podcast. I love what you're doing for the Snap community. So it's just awesome. So keep up the great work, man. If anyone does want to check out my channel, I'm really just doing YouTube stuff, just having fun with it, trying to do daily videos if I can, but I got like family and work and all those things, so it's gonna be tough at times. But I like to just have fun, so I do like challenge videos. Speaking of randomness, I actually do draft videos where I put all the cards that I own in Marvel Snap into a random generator and draft 3 choices at a time to build a deck of 12, and then I play games with that deck called Snap Draft. It's been pretty fun, but it is random.
Yep.
So I guess it's a little on point here. But yeah, that's it. Just the YouTube channel. Come check it out. Come hang out.
Well, awesome. Well, if and when we hopefully get some kind of a draft or random mode built into the game directly, we will definitely have to have you back on to discuss that. So,
I would love to.
awesome. Well, thank you again. Listeners, as always, we appreciate you being here and supporting the podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at can't_stop_snap for more information about the podcast and to give us your feedback. And we will catch you in the next episode. Can't Stop Snapping is a podcast written, recorded, produced, and hosted by Michael Thurman. Thanks for listening.